All right, welcome everybody to today's program. People are going to come in and out, we know that. And A lot of people who also we record our programming, so you'll be able to see this, or if any of your friends or family couldn't make it today, we will certainly be sending this out. Okay, so let's get started. I am Wendy Singer, Director of Programming for No Shame on You. On behalf of our volunteers, our staff, our board of directors, we welcome you to today's program, which is part of our awesome Feed Your Mind series, which is a monthly lunch and learn series on a variety of different mental health topics. On the menu today is a really important one and near and dear to my heart. It's called The Sandwich Generation, Caring for Yourself While Caring for Others. No Shame on You, for those of you who are new to it, is an organization dedicated to eliminating the stigma surrounding mental health challenges so that people who need the help will seek it and family and friends will know how to provide proper support and to save lives. No Shame on You achieves its mission through all kinds of ways. One of these is through public programming. We also customize workshops for schools, organizations, and companies. We share daily online resources, but we also create a whole vast array of resources for people for themselves and to support their loved ones. We have a huge social media following. So if you are a social media person, take a moment and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. We have about 125,000 followers. I'd like to thank our generous donors who allow us to provide these monthly Feed Your Mind series. And I also want to thank CJE SeniorLife for partnering with us on today's program. Today, we have really an awesome presenter who I've gotten to know a little bit over the last year. Her name is Sharon Dornberg-Lee. Sharon has her LCSW and received her Master's of Arts in Social Work from University of Chicago, Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy and Practice. And she is currently the Clinical Director of Community Services at CJE SeniorLife, located here in the Chicagoland area. And she has worked there for 26 years. In her current role, Sharon provides clinical consultation and supervision, directs support and therapy groups across the agency, coordinates field instruction, and a lot of other amazing things through her organization. She's also a former adjunct instructor of the Crown Family School, where she taught aging and mental health, and was a longtime instructor in the Crown Professional Development clinical practice with older adults. She is I'm in a presentation here from home. She is also an executive board member of the Illinois Coalition of Mental Health and Aging. And now for a little bit of housekeeping, keep your microphone on mute. That way, if you have a dog that wants to talk, they can't communicate. We will also have an audience Q&A after the presentation. You can submit your questions to me, Wendy, No Shame on You, throughout the presentation. And without further ado, welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction, Wendy. This is an important topic, so I'm so glad you asked me to speak on this topic in particular. And it's so good to be with all of you and have so much respect for the important work of No Shame on You. So I'm particularly happy to be here today. We are indeed going to be talking about the sandwich generation. And I am indeed the clinical director of community services at CJE, where I've been for a really long time. Most of that time was in our counseling department. So I've worked a lot one-on-one and in other contexts and groups and public speaking with a lot of caregivers and adult children as well. So this topic is close to my heart as well. A few words about CJE SeniorLife, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our services at the end. But we are a nonprofit elder care provider in the Chicago metropolitan area, and we touch the lives of about 20,000 older adults and their family members every year. Our mission is to facilitate the independence and to enhance the quality of life of older adults. And these are our values that we try to live through and work through every day. So first of all, what is the sandwich generation? It's a term that's been around for a long time, and it refers to those who are providing care both to aging parents and to young children, or in some cases, young adult children who are still either financially dependent or still requiring care from their parents. And this is a growing phenomenon because people are living longer. So we've got our parents with us longer, which is a wonderful blessing, but also means that they're more likely to require care during their lifetimes. And also, in some cases, people are waiting longer to start their families and to have children. And so for that reason, also it's more likely that people are part of this sandwich generation. In the US broadly, about a quarter of adults are considered part of the sandwich generation, which is that they have an older adult parent and a younger child. If you're in your 40s, then the chances are more than 1 in 2 that you'll be in this category and considered part of the sandwich generation. This is just an illustration of the sandwich, which I thought was cute and that I admit I stole online. As I'm sure you all know, the baby boom generation is a huge one, and those folks are becoming older adults. I think that by 2030, is it? They will all be 65 and older, but for sure by the year 2030, that's going to be 72 million people who are 65 and over in our society in the United States. And that's up from 40 million in 2010. So look at that growth of older adults. And it's just an amazing growth rate. And so that means all the more parents that will require care. In my career, I have known many, many, many wonderful male caregivers, adult children, spouses, but statistically, caregiving is still mostly women's work. 75% of all caregivers are women, and they spend as much as 50% more time providing care than their male counterparts. So this is an issue that is of particular importance to women, but also to male caregivers. The average caregiver today, if you would just kind of, mush it into a composite based on the statistical likelihood, is a 46-year-old woman. She's married, she works outside the home, she has some college education and earns an annual income of $35,000 a year and spends 20 hours or more each week caring for a parent. Think about that. That's a part-time job. And also you'll see that the average caregiver is also not wealthy, right? They're making relatively little income. And that also poses then limitations and challenges in terms of not having a lot of excess, if any, resources to kind of throw around to supplement the care that they're providing in terms of paid services and supports. There have also been some terms that are kind of new variations on the idea of the sandwich generation, or a variation of the sandwich, if you will. One type is those who have an elderly parent that may or may not live with them, and a young adult child, also called a boomerang child, who has returned home. So an adult child that was launched, but then came back home. This was especially true during the Great Recession, but is still a phenomenon today with rising costs. So that's another variation on the sandwich that may apply to some of you. There's also the term of the club sandwich, which is those who are caring not only for aging parents and children, but also grandchildren. So imagine the stresses, or maybe you don't have to imagine if that applies to you, of all of those generations needing care. And, a lot of economic and social factors come into play that have really changed the composition of families. Again, people living longer, the recession, rising costs, a dearth of affordable housing, for older adults or for young adults for that matter. So all these things are kind of conspiring to make it that much more challenging for people who are providing the care. Lots of times the need of an older parent for care can creep up very slowly. Sometimes it happens very suddenly. There's a sudden dramatic change in health or circumstance. But very often it happens very slowly in my experience. First, the parent may just need a little help going over the bills and kind of managing their accounts or paying bills each month. Or they may need a little bit of help applying for government benefits or just dealing with the avalanche of mail that comes into their house every week as they're getting older. And then often very gradually, you may notice if you are the adult child that their needs grow and they start to need more and more. As I said, sometimes this can be sudden and more often it occurs slowly. So the parent may need to move to a senior community. And certainly if that happens, that doesn't mean you're not a caregiver anymore. You may already know that when a parent moves to a senior community, that does not alleviate all of your stress or all of your responsibilities as a caregiver. If anything, during those transitions, it can be kind of the peak level of exhaustion for a family caregiver as they're trying to help an aging parent adjust and, deal with all of the aspects of moving and living in a new community. So certainly you are a caregiver regardless of where your parent lives, regardless of whether they're in a skilled nursing facility, living in their own home, living with you, living in an independent living community. All of those adult children are caregivers if they're involved in any way in the care of an aging parent. So when you think about the sandwich generation, especially for those who are working, it's really a perfect storm of stress. On a humorous note, over the weekend, I was watching a TV show called An Almost Normal Family. It was a British drama. And it was a young woman who was accused of murder because it was a murder mystery show. And while her parents are getting the news that their daughter has been arrested for murdering somebody, which she didn't do, she was exonerated, that the mother gets a call from the care home for her father and said, your father's being really difficult. We don't know if we can keep him here. He's really stressing out the staff and being inappropriate. And I thought, well, there's the sandwich generation for you, right? She's dealing with so much stress on both ends of the spectrum of her caregiving responsibilities. So it may not be as dramatic as in a murder mystery, but it often does feel like a perfect storm of stress for people who are in this situation of getting it from all sides. The last time I gave this talk, I talked to some of my clients because I'm no longer part of the sandwich generation, sadly. My parents have passed. So I talked to some of my clients and I said, what are some of the challenges you face as a member of this generation? And one of the things they said is they always feel guilty, no matter how hard they try to, and Wendy's nodding and Sarah's nodding, no matter how hard they try to be a good parent, a good employee, a child, they just feel like they're falling short because there's just too much for them to be, to feel like they're excelling at all of those things or giving everything the time and attention they need. The other theme with my colleagues was exhaustion. One of them said, there's only so much of me to go around. One of my colleagues said she spends part of every weekend with her newly widowed dad, which by the way also means she's lost her mom and is grieving. Her dad is adjusting to life in a new retirement community. And she said she chooses to do that. She really is close to her dad and enjoys being with him. But between that and parenting for her adolescent child, she said it doesn't really leave me any time to recuperate and relax over the weekend. And then I've got to go back to my full-time job on Monday. Another colleague said she takes her dad to the grocery store every weekend because she knows he really enjoys getting out with her. And even though she enjoys that and enjoys giving him the pleasure of that, he's slow because he's an older adult. And so it takes her a long time to run this errand. And she finds herself thinking, oh, I could do this so much more quickly by myself, and even feeling a little resentful, even though she's chosen to do this. And she just ends up feeling exhausted. Then she comes home to her 3 young adult children who are all just out of college and still live at home, and then has a whole other set of responsibilities at home, and also just wants to spend quality time with them. So it went on and on. There were a lot of stories like that. And all of them, luckily, said that they had really positive relationships with their parents. But this can be even trickier when a parent and child relationship isn't as seamless as these individuals were lucky to have. Sometimes there are real tensions and stressors there in those relationships. And also, they all said that their parents really are aware of the pressures on their child and really want them to have a life of their own and almost try not to ask for too much. But not every parent is that aware. And sometimes, especially as people age, they may be less sensitive to the demands and the amount of time that they're kind of encroaching on with, if you will. That might be the wrong word. But that they may demand a lot in terms of an adult child's time. And sometimes they can't help it to make those demands because they really need a lot of help. So those things can all add up to even more stress. I do want to say before we go on, though, that my colleagues all mentioned, and I experienced this as a caregiver, that caregiving also has its rewards. All of these individuals said they were so grateful to have their parents in their lives still, even though they were of advanced age and needed help. So there's also blessings that can go along with caregiving. And so that's an important piece of the sandwich, if you will, to remember. So given all this stress, what are some of the things that can be helpful if you are, in fact, a member of the sandwich generation, or if you know you're headed that way, that you may become a member of the sandwich generation? So one of the things is to learn about the resources that are out there that help with the aging process and with your children as well. But I'm here to talk more about the aging side of things today. And when I say that, learn about the resources, your first thought might be, I know mine would be, oh, great, she's putting more on my to-do list. That's just what I need, is to now start studying up and becoming an expert on the resources. So you don't need to become an expert, but it is true that the more you know going into this, often the less stress you'll have to deal with when situations pop up and arise. In my own caregiving experience for my mother, I was in my early 20s, sadly, when my mom passed in her late 50s. And so I knew absolutely zero about anything. And one of the things I experienced was my mom needed a caregiver. So I found an agency and I hired one, and it proved to be a really not good caregiver. And so then I told the agency I need another caregiver and another, and each one was worse than the last. It was really unbelievable how bad my situations were. Not little problems, big problems, like they were stealing from my mother and things like that. And I was so young and naive, it never occurred to me that I should change agencies. And when I think about that now, that was so ridiculous, right? I just had a really bad agency. And once I switched agencies, I got a wonderful caregiver who stuck for the rest of her life. But the point of that is you don't know what you don't know. And so if you can take some time to learn a little bit about things that are likely to come up, even though, yes, it's more on your to-do list, it may really serve you well. Even if you spend 1 hour a month trying to learn about some of the resources that are out there and just kind of schedule that time like you would an appointment, it might really be helpful for you down the road to plan and to learn what's out there and what you need to know. Whoops, I don't know what I did there. I went way ahead. Okay. So, is that the first one? Yes. So, one of the things you might want to learn about are entitlement programs. And that's things like Medicare, Medicaid for people who are low income, Social Security, the VA if one of your parents is a veteran. So for example, many people don't know until they're in that situation that Medicare will not pay for home care for an aging parent. They will only pay for home health which is a short-term service with physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, sometimes a social worker and a nurse. But that's and sometimes a home health aide for a very short time. But a lot of people don't know that. They're like, oh, my mom needs care. I think Medicare should pay for that. And then they have a very rude awakening that no, that not, over the long term, Medicare is not going to pay for that care at home. That's usually private pay. So without getting into all the nuances of those things today, I'm just giving that as an example that it's good to know in advance, right? So you can think about other ways that you might need to finance care at home for an aging parent. You might want to look into, if you're working, into your own employee benefits package to find out in advance, is emergency leave an option to care for aging family members? Under the Family and Medical Leave Act, you can get up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave, and your job and your health insurance will be protected. But that only applies to larger organizations that have more than 50 employees. And I think you have to work a certain number of hours a week too. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That's good to find out now so you don't have a surprise later, but also to be like, hey, I've got those FMLA hours. Maybe I do want to use those once in a while. You don't need to use them all at once. You can spread them out. So to be aware of and knowledgeable about kind of what benefits and entitlement programs are out there for you and for your parent. There's also so much to know about housing options for seniors, and it really exceeds our time today to go into all of them. But for example, a lot of people don't know that there's something called supportive living for seniors that's subsidized, covered by Medicaid for people who are eligible, but it can be private pay until they become eligible. And it's a lot like assisted living. A lot of people are shocked to hear that there's a category that can be government paid for that's a lot like assisted living for people who don't have resources, so they don't have to go to a nursing home prematurely. So that's just one example of the fact that there are a lot of things out there. There are also services in the home that are paid for through the Department on Aging for those in Illinois today, called the Community Care Program. So for people who are have lower asset levels, less savings, not including their home, they may be eligible for free care at home. That can be a lot of hours every week. So Medicare won't pay for it, but the community care program might. So these are examples of things to get knowledgeable about, ideally before the need arises, but if not, to know that there are guides out there like CJE. We're happy to help you. And if you're not in the Chicago area, by the way, we can guide you to a local resource, because I understand there might be people today on the program from elsewhere. And no shame on you as well. Is happy to help people connect with local resources. The other thing is just to think about and make a plan for the array of things that come up as people age. One is driving. Another is, as I said, where people are going to live and how they're going to pay for it. Another is, how are you going to get food if your parents get to the point where they can no longer cook or no longer feel like they want to cook? What are some of the options? Who's going to do the shopping? And then who's going to manage your older parents' finances? And how are they going to pay for care? These are things that even if your parents are relatively young and healthy, it's a good idea to talk about in advance. And just, as I said, even if it's an hour a month doing a little research or reaching out one time to CJE for a consultation to ask about some of these things. Our initial consultations are all free, and our intake department is happy to help people kind of think through these things. Also, advanced directives are a really important thing to do sooner rather than later. It's essential that advanced directives be completed while a parent is still capable of naming somebody else to make decisions on their behalf, often an adult child, if they're no longer able to make their own decisions. If you wait until a parent, God forbid, has dementia and can't complete legal documents because of the changes in their capacity, it's too late for an advance directive. So it's really important to do it while the person can talk this through with you and consent and pick somebody to make decisions for them in the event they ever can't make their own decisions. That day may never come, but if it does, to know that they've named somebody in advance to make both healthcare decisions and financial decisions. There's two separate documents. They're both called powers of attorney, and one is healthcare and one is for finances, also called property. And so those are the kinds of things that are important to set up now so that substitute decision makers are in place. If you have an older parent who's exhibiting any memory concerns, there's also something called a geriatric assessment that's usually covered by insurance, by Medicare or other insurance. Usually it's a hospital-based program where they would have a team, usually a neurologist, a geriatrician, a social worker, really do a comprehensive assessment. Don't let anybody just say, well, they're old, memory changes, right? It can be sometimes treatable things that are reversible. So don't ignore memory changes, get an assessment and figure it out what's going on if there are changes. My colleague, Tamra Kushner-Groman, who is our Director of Legal Services, she's a big advocate for a binder, and she'll help clients, and we provide free legal services at CJE. Think about what should go in that binder. But even without her, just think about where can I organize all of this? For you, it might be online, it might be in a physical notebook, whatever is your style and whatever works best for you, but try to have everything in one place so that if something does come up, you kind of don't feel flustered and are looking like, don't do as I do, do as I say. I'll be looking for an email from 5 years ago. Where was that information that I needed? So try to, if you can, be organized.
Sharon, I have a quick
Sure.
question that came up here that I got in the chat. As far as that is relevant to exactly what you're talking about, the legal services, what are examples of some of the legal services that CJE or other organizations might be able to provide?
So CJE is blessed to have a grant that provides free legal services for anybody in the state of Illinois, regardless of income. I believe you do have to be an older adult. So it's for people 60 and up. But as an adult child, if you did this for your parents, not for yourself, then they could be covered. And we will help you. Our legal team does not go to court. So if you have a civil matter, they're not going to go to court for you, and we don't do anything criminal, but they will help you to draft for free a will, a power of attorney, both types that I mentioned. They can help give legal advice and kind of tell you, what do you need to be thinking about now from a planning and legal perspective for an aging parent? So we can make the older adult the client, and then we can help with those kinds of things. We help with other things too, like if we deal with a lot with like housing, tenant landlord disputes, again, not going to court, but giving advice. And I'd be happy to share with Wendy a longer list of all the kinds of things our legal services can provide. But you can also just call our main number, 773-508-1000, and make an intake appointment. And then from there, they can really tell you in much more depth what legal services and also all the other services that CJE provides.
Thank you.
Finally, on this slide, I just wanted to mention that values are really important in all of this planning. What is important to you? What is important to your parent? What is important that you really are going to kind of make sure is first and foremost as you're making plans? So for example, some people really want to be able to see their loved ones regularly. And so if you're going to be moving to a senior community, then it's got to be really close to family. That's more important than a place that's maybe physically beautiful or where you can have 2 bedrooms or whatever. So that proximity might be a value. So I really want to see my family often. For some older people, their value is I want to stay at home no matter what, even if it means I'm more isolated and have fewer, the headache of being a homeowner. Staying in my home is most important, a lot of older people will say. So those kinds of values of what's most important can really guide some of your planning and decision making, and is often a good place to start to have conversations with aging parents. The other thing I wanted to stress today is it really takes a team when you're in the sandwich generation, and a lot of people might try to be the Lone Ranger a little bit too much. And especially this happened with me and my family. My sister lives, I have one sibling and she lives out of state. And when there were caregiving responsibilities for our parents, a lot fell on me because I lived here and so did my parents. And so it's easy in those situations to start to feel angry and resentful. I know I did. I have a lovely sister. She was eager and willing to help, but I kind of felt like she'd, from my perspective, she'd float into town and get to do fun things with my parents or my grandmother. And then she'd leave and I'd have to deal with the doctor's appointments and the schlepping and the stressful things. So sometimes when we get into those situations, and it's very common when one adult child is out of town, it's important to try to repair those relationships as much as possible. That doesn't mean disavowing your feelings about it, but to also know that we can work through it and not lose those other family members as kind of members of our team who are going to help us. One of my clients once said something really wise that I often repeat, which is that when she gets angry at people, she doesn't necessarily even forgive it or forget it, but she learns to step over it for the relationship. And I love that idea of just stepping over it, which is easier said than done sometimes. But you're going to need those team members and think about who else can help me as I'm dealing with being a member of the sandwich generation. Who's on my team both to help with my kids and who's on my team to help with my aging parents. And then sometimes people disappoint us as caregivers, as family members who are also caregivers. They don't do as much as we think they should do, even if they're local, or they may just have limitations. But to think about, is there still a role we can carve out for that person? Like, for example, my friend has an aging dad, and she has one brother out of state, and she has a sister in state. And her sister just has some limitations. There's a lot of things she just can't deal with. But if she tells her sister, take dad to the doctor on these 3 dates, she will happily do it. If she were to tell her sister, deal with all of the follow-up of planning stuff for dad in terms of his care needs, it's just sort of too much for the sister. She can't do it. So she's just learned that there are these things, ways in which her sister can be so helpful. And it's not everything that she would wish her sister could do, but it's what her sister can do. And so to think about that in advance, what are the roles that people can have and what is realistic for each family member? And by the way, I should also mention families of choice. It doesn't have to be a sibling who helps you. It could be a best friend who loves your parent and who grew up with them too, who might be happy to help with some things from time to time. It could be your partner, your spouse. So it depends on, who you're going to pull in for your supports, and don't feel like you have to do it all alone. I say to myself as a recovering martyr to think about, are you trying too much to do everything yourself? I know I fell into that. I would just feel sometimes as a caregiver resentful, and I would just be like, forget it. I'll just do it. You're not going to do it the way I want it. But then I was sort of, cutting off my nose to spite my face. So to ask yourself honestly, am I allowing the help that's available to me to lighten my load, even if it's not perfect? There are also a lot of things that an out-of-town sibling or helper, another caregiver for your parent or children can do, even if they're out of town, right? I listed here some of the things that they can do. Sometimes it feels like people who are far away can't do much, but the reality is if you give them some tasks to do, they may be feeling guilty that they're far away and can't help much. And so you could perhaps delegate some of these things to somebody far away. The other thing is, are there things you can delegate, not necessarily to another family member, but to a service if you can afford to use a service? So for example, grocery shopping is something that a lot of people do for aging parents. but do you really have to do it? Could you automate it in some ways? Like I use Amazon Fresh to get my groceries, and it's not any more expensive than going to the grocery store. They deliver right to my door. So if you've got a regular shopping list going for a parent, even if they're not tech savvy enough to go place that order, it's something you could do every week and just, reorder same items or whatever in a very time efficient way rather than going to the grocery store, schlepping the stuff back, and all that's involved in that. There are also some other things out there like I don't know if you've heard of caringbridge.org. It's one particular, I see nods. It's one particular way to set up help with a website. So for example, my friend's partner had a lot of PT appointments when he was sick, and she set up a Caring Bridge site for her friends to volunteer to drive him to his PT appointments. And we were all so happy to be able to do something to help our friend who was thrust into this role of caregiver very suddenly when her partner was sick. And so that's a way, it's an easy way to ask people to help. You can do a meal train. There are other things you can set up through this site. The other thing I would suggest is if people do say, is there anything I can do to help? Don't just say no, no, thank you, which I think we all have an inclination to do sometimes, but say, actually, there is one thing, and even have a list ready. And you could start with something really small, like could you take somebody to an appointment one time? Or could you call my parent when I'm going to be out of town next week and just check in? That would mean the world to me, right? Whatever it is, could you help me with insurance issues? Because I know that you did that for a living, or you did that for your parent and you're really good with that. Whatever it is, think about ways that people can help you. Don't be afraid to ask. If you think about what it's like to give help, we often do that very willingly, right? It feels good to be able to help a friend or a family member. And yet many of us are afraid to ask for help. And so just know when you ask that probably the person on the other end of the line who asked you if they could help really means it and really would like to help. And it would be their pleasure to do that. And also think about the tasks if you're doing stuff for a child for that matter too, but also for an aging parent. What really are things you need to do because they're enjoyable, they contribute to your relationship, nobody else can do them? Or what are things you could delegate? And is there even a free way to get some help with this? Don't assume there isn't. There's a lot of free resources and services out there. So for example, driving is one of the things that comes up. Sometimes you need to go with somebody to the doctor and sometimes you don't, but they just need a ride. So for example, there's a service called GoGo, which is a way to access like an Uber or a Lyft that's older adult friendly. You don't need to do it through a smartphone. You can call a service. And they charge a really small amount every month. I can't remember how much it is. I want to say $10 for this service. And then you get to book your Ubers with a kind of older adult friendly person through a phone number. And that might be, like a really affordable, accessible way for somebody to get medical transportation rather than sometimes older adults hang on to their cars, which are costing them a fortune, and they could actually save money by getting rid of the car and using that for Uber rides, but also save you the time of taking them around to doctor's appointments. That's just one example. And there's some other transportation options here as well. The other thing that's so important to think about for the sandwich generation is how do you take care of yourself? Because it's just as important as taking care of all those other people that are demanding your time and energy and that you love and want to care for. You really need to save a little bit of time for yourself. That might just mean a 10-minute walk a day. It doesn't have to be a lot, but what time are you setting aside to stay healthy, to cook a healthy meal, or to, just do something fun for yourself, watch a little TV and yeah, zone out. Wendy has given a big thumbs up that's important. It's important not just for your own self-care, and it's a way to show compassion for and to nurture yourself, but it's also going to give you the energy you need to go on to do those caregiving things. Because if you're just burnt out and exhausted and haven't done anything to recharge your own batteries, so to speak, then you're not going to have the energy that you need to do all those other things that take your time and that you value. That might be going to a religious service. It might be spending a little time on the treadmill. It might be doing mindfulness. It might be eating junk food and just giving yourself permission to enjoy a guilty pleasure. Whatever it is that helps you feel recharged, it's important to make time for it. I would also just really encourage people to be aware of guilt as something that frequently pops up for people who are having these competing caregiving demands, and to try not to do that to yourself, to focus on the positives, on everything you are doing and not everything you didn't get to this week. Those shoulds that are in our heads can be so toxic. I should have done this. I should have done that. And we're doing the best we can, right? And to know that you're doing the best you can. And maybe there are things you should have done, should have. And maybe those weren't shoulds because you didn't get to them. And that's okay, to let yourself off the hook. And you might, sometimes this is helpful for people if they have an aging parent who, because of their progression of an illness or just with advanced age, have become very demanding. What would that parent have wanted for you in terms of balance in your life before they changed and got sick? So, for example, if somebody has dementia, they may not be really thinking about your needs. They may just be feeling very anxious or overwhelmed themselves. But what would that parent have wanted for you before they got sick? And can you try to respond to that voice as well as their present voice telling you you should do more? How can you practice self-compassion, even if you don't have a parent or never did, that says, yes, I don't want to burden you? How can you express your compassion for yourself and talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend rather than being this harsh inner voice that's probably going to add to your stress, that's telling you you're not doing enough or you did it wrong? But can you talk to yourself more the way you would talk to a friend? Because your physical and your emotional health are really important to keeping your batteries charged. And I also, I have to say, I was originally, when people talk about gratitude practice, I was a little bit of a naysayer when I first heard about gratitude, because I think I thought of it as one more thing you had to do. Oh, now not only do I have to do all the things I have to do, now I've got a gratitude journal, right? It didn't feel like it was going to enhance my life. But the reality is focusing on gratitude, whether it's through a journal or just taking a moment to be grateful that your parents are still in your life, for example, or grateful for the blessing of your children. It can create a shift, knowing that you have the blessing of time, even when it feels like a burden, because there are times when it does, and it will feel like a burden to care for children that you love dearly, to care for your parents that you love dearly. It's also really difficult and really challenging to be a caregiver. So to remind yourself of both sides of that yes, it can be a burden, and yes, it's also a gift to have time with them. I also want to say, and this is a tough one for a lot of people, that it's okay to say no to your parents or your children. You probably practice that a lot with your children, but you may not be used to practicing it with your parents. It's okay to say no, that you can't do everything. You can say it with love. You can say it with respect. It doesn't mean you're not fulfilling your filial duties, your responsibility to your parents, who have given so much to you in many cases. It's still okay. I remember reading this book years ago, and I can't remember the name of it now. It might have been The Good Enough Mother. Anyway, she said that every child will demand 100% of their parent. And you can't give every child 100% of your time and energy. So it's up to you as a parent to then decide, what can you give? What is feasible? And it involves setting some limits. And I don't know why, my daughter was young when I read that book. That really resonated for me. Like, oh, of course I don't have to give everything that's asked of me. I think I thought I did. And so the same is true of your aging parents. You get to set some limits on it, and you can still be a wonderful child and very loving and respectful, and knowing that you can't give 100% of yourself. So the other thing that sometimes comes up a lot is I've tried to delegate things and to get my parents to accept some help, and they just say no. They are very reluctant to accept help. And that's a very, very common situation. And it's okay to be insistent. Even if your parents say, no, I don't need that, to say, I really, really need you to try this for me. Just try it. This is something you can do for me. I understand you don't think it's necessary or you don't want it. You can be more insistent about those things if somebody is reluctant to accept help. And I understand we could have a whole, hour for sure just on that topic of how to get somebody to accept help who's reluctant. But CJE is also happy to help in those ways in terms of thinking about that. But for today's purposes, I'm just giving you permission to be more insistent that you don't have to do everything yourself just because that's a preference of one of the people you're caring for.
And I just want to say from personal experience that that's an excellent tip, to say it's for me. It's not for you, it's for me. And then really, they want to support you too. So
Exactly.
it's a
They're
good
often willing
angle.
to,
Yeah.
right. Parents are often willing to do for us what they may not be willing to do for themselves. Or part of aging too is that people often don't see their own deficits, sadly. People often really believe that they're just fine, even though you may be laying awake at night worrying about an aging parent. The parent will say, oh yeah, I fell, but I just was I wasn't careful, but now I'll be careful, right? We hear that all the time. And so the children are worried sick about what they see as something unsafe, and the older adult really believes it's fine, there's no problem. So they may be willing to do for you what they wouldn't be willing to do for themselves. I want to go pretty quickly towards the end because I want to have time for questions. So I think I said earlier, you've got to strengthen your own support system, reach out to others, find out other ways that people are dealing with these issues, and create a network of support. You might even attend a support group for caregivers, of which there are many to be had, including Summit CJE. This again is our main number. As I said, we do provide a free initial consultation that's pretty comprehensive, and then we'll connect you to whatever services may or may not be relevant for you, many of which are free. Our counseling is billable to insurance. As I mentioned, we have legal services that's really helpful. We have benefits help for aging people. We have care management, much of which is free based on asset level. We have adult day services. We have lots of services. We have counseling. And we have several caregiver support groups. Before we get to Q&A, I just wanted to mention a new group that we're starting for caregivers, because I wanted to ask your help to spread the word, whether you're interested for yourself or others, because we need a few more members to get started. This is an 8-week caregiver group for those age 55 and up. So some of you may be too young and some not. So it could be adult children or partners who are providing care for an older person, and it's a more process-oriented therapy group for caregivers. So it is billable to insurance, and that you need to have a assessment before you begin. So if you know anybody who might be interested in this group, Lisa Andrews is the leader. She's wonderful. This is her direct number, and Wendy's going to send out a flyer after the program for those who registered with this information, as well as my slides from today. So let me stop sharing so I can see everybody. And what questions or comments do you have? You look in the chat too.
I have a comment, actually.
Sure.
I'm Johanna Fine. Hi, I have two parents who have been in, they moved into independent living in a senior facility and then just transferred 2 weeks ago to a different facility that offers a little bit more care because they're now both sort of in the assisted living piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, and I am, my brother and I both live local, but I'm closer and deal with the health stuff. He deals with the financial stuff. We've divided a lot of what you've done. We've already done. So this was helpful. But one thing that I've just recently figured out that is a huge time saver is many of these facilities have doctors that come to their, like nurse practitioners, doctors that come to their facilities and are covered under insurance. So what I've just realized is I don't have to go to all these appointments anymore with my folks. They can go downstairs. I can set them up to go to see their doctor, a doctor downstairs. And unless it's a specialist that they have to go see, there's no more taking off of work and driving and meeting them and reminding them 7 times and getting them a cab and picking them up. It's huge time
That's
saver. So
huge. It's a
yeah,
wonderful tip. Thank you, Johanna. That's just the kind of thing where you don't know what you don't know until you
right.
learn it, right?
I mean,
It's
I
like,
asked because it was like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore.
right. It's exhausting going to all those appointments. And for
Yeah.
older adults, it's never ending, unfortunately, for them or for you. So to have a provider that can come to them. The other thing is like there are some podiatrists who do house calls even to your home, even if your parents are still living at home. There are doctors who do house calls that will go to somebody's home as well as a senior community. So CJE has a list of all those kinds of things where you can ask your friends or others, who do they like, who do they see, who does house calls. And some of those house calls programs, also you can retain your primary care physician if you like them that you have now, but still see this other provider who will come to your house much of the time. Sometimes no, you have to choose that doctor as your primary care physician. But like a podiatrist is a great example, by the way. There's no reason you need to go with your parent to the podiatrist. It's not, I mean, unless it's an unusual circumstance, but usually it's like to cut their toenails or something really not important for a caregiver to be present to discuss with the doctor. And if you could have a podiatrist that comes to the house and save yourself all that schlepping, or a good primary care physician who comes to the facility and works with seniors, huge, right? So don't
And
assume those things don't exist.
yeah, and one of the things I asked was, well, if I don't go to the appointment, how do I get an update as to what's going on? But the nurses there, then because we have POAs, they can keep me in the loop. And so
It's a
there's no
POA.
um power of attorney
Oh,
that
got
Sharon
it.
mentioned earlier. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. No, 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 no.
Um,
No, it's good.
but like, so it's like they will give you the information that you need to keep up to date on the status, even if you're not at the appointment.
Wonderful. And
Yeah.
if you have a release to talk to that doctor, you can also call the doctor and
Right.
just say, what's going on? How did that go? I mean, some are better or worse at calling back, but they usually will call back. So that can be a way to avoid the whole appointment with a quick phone call.
I'll share one other tidbit that I learned since we're sharing, Johanna, that I think it's important because I didn't know this until I went through it myself. Is I have aging parents in California, and one of them was in the hospital, the other one was recovering from surgery. So I had to fly out there, and my dad was um had pneumonia, and so he wasn't clear-headed. He had Parkinson's. He was a fall risk. I ended up staying in the ER for several days with him, like living with him in the ER, and it was pretty traumatic. But by at the end, I figured out that you can request to have someone like sit with your parent if you can't be there. So the second I had no idea. So the second time it happened, I knew to ask for that. So he had someone with eyeballs on him, and it cost nothing. It was free. And I just didn't know. So I did it, which I was my honor to do, but I couldn't go back out there the following week being long distance. And it was a big worry and stress on my head. So
That's
Totally.
a great tip. It's called a sitter.
yes.
When somebody might be at risk alone, right? So it wouldn't be just for company, but if like you're like, this person can't be alone, it could be dangerous, he could fall or whatever.
Yeah, it was a fall risk and all
Yep.
that.
That's
And I
a
didn't know
great,
that. So I want to share that with
right.
everybody.
How would you? How would you, right? Those are all the things that you learn over the years in my field, but most people learn through bitter experience. So it's also a great reason to connect with other caregivers through one, even if you're like, you know what, I'm not sure I need a support group, I'm doing okay. You might consider going to a caregiver support group for all these tips, all these
Yeah.
resources, all these things that caregivers learn from one another.
One last question is, do you know of any like groups on like Facebook groups or anything like that where you can ask questions like that? Is there anything like that out there that you know of?
I'm 100% sure that it is out there, but I don't know what it is. But you know what? I will give some resources. I'll do a little research.
Just wonder, because sometimes it's like, you just want to ask a quick question and, I was going to like the California parenting group, and I was like, does anyone know this question? So it would have been,
I
that would
want
be
to
a
make
cool
sure to give
resource.
you some
Yeah,
reputable resources.
yeah.
So let me send you, and I have some pulled together already. I forgot to include today. So let me pull together a resource list and I'll send that to you too. I'll make it short and sweet so you can get your stuff out quickly to people.
Well, thank you so much. If there's any other questions, we'll take it now. I'm going to put into the chat a link to I just lost it, but I'm going to get it again. Fear not. Um,
And
all
I'll
right,
make,
here we go.
oh, go ahead, sorry.
You make your announcement, and then I will get this in there.
Announcement?
Do you have an announcement? Any announcement that you want to share with
Oh, no, just about the group that I already mentioned, but I was just gonna say, I have this whole long list of resources for caregivers that I'll send you that I
oh,
compiled fairly
perfect.
recently for another talk. And then I'll also find if there are online communities where you can ask a question.
Awesome. So in the chat, I just would, if you could take a minute and fill out this short survey, it helps us report back to our generous funders and make sure that our programming is on the mark and suggestions for other programming. I want to thank you, Sharon, so much for this conversation and this presentation. It is no joke caring for parents and family members and kids at the same time. It is no joke. And I'm so grateful for CJE and the resources that you have. And personally, I called that intake number 9 months ago, and it was so helpful just to get like a lay of the land a little bit. I was like, I know nothing. Can you help me? And CJA did that on that intake call. Our final announcement is that our next Feed Your Mind series is in January 24th. It's on seasonal affective disorder, and it's with one of the heads of the psychology department at UIC, Dr. Sally Weinstein, who it's going to be great. She's appeared on WGEN and some other local news stations as an expert on this. And I just want to thank everyone for being here and have a great day. Happy December 18th. And hopefully you get a few days off for the holidays coming soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much for
Sharon.